are back. This is the Chelsea Football Fancast. I am Stamford Chidge, and we're going to get a bit serious now, I think. We kind of, for some reason, we decided to do that last week, and amazingly, we still had some viewers. So I thought, well, we'll give it another whirl again. And as we've got Pablo and Seb on the show tonight, I thought we should take advantage of their very huge brains. But the whole point behind this is, in the middle of last week, a certain Matthew Syed from the Times, well known to Chelsea supporters because he's had a dig at us quite a lot in the past, pretty much regurgitated an article, funnily enough, that he wrote about a year ago, where he, I'll read you some quotes from it, but he basically had a pop at Roman Abramovich, and the general tenet of the article was that he can't understand why Chelsea supporters don't go up in arms, have mass demonstrations, and make a right row about the fact that Roman, his rise to prominence and a lot of his wealth was gained at the expense of a lot of the Russian people. Anyway, I mean, I'll read you some of this because this is just, beggars belief, really. He calls the rehabilitation of Abramovich one of the most sordid episodes in recent sporting history, and expresses surprise that commentators don't offer a word. As in, apparently in the middle of John Motson or Jonathan Peters going, whatever they do, they should say, instead of, and there's the owner celebrating the goal, they should say, and there's the owner that stole millions of pounds from the Russian people. How terribly awful is that? And all of the chavs that support them are disgusting too. That's what all the commentators say.
Can you do everything in a Murray Walker voice? That was brilliant.
It was good, actually. Jonathan Pierce, it's more like that. No,
that's Murray Walker.
I've been taken away now by that. Yeah, Jonathan Pierce does it more like that. In fact, I can't even do it much of that.
Anyway, the other thing he said, let me read you this. Let me read you this.
Ross has gone, by the way.
Ross has gone, I know. Ross is 1-0. Anyway, the most common justification offered by Chelsea fans is also, this is a direct quote, is also the most egregious. It goes something like this. I watch football. Shall I do it in a Chelsea fan? I watch football to switch off from the real life. It is an escape. I don't want to get bogged down in thinking about politics. And then Matthew Syed, yeah,
You've
Martin.
just lost half your viewers.
Dr. Martin. This is offensive. Apparently, science says this is offensive because it goes to the heart of a wider malaise in football. It's the idea that football is subject to a different set of rules to everything else. Now, the great thing is, before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, is that Gab Marcotti, who is actually a Chelsea supporter and also a man with a huge head, because it contains a huge brain. That would be why. That's why he's got a very big head. But he has actually got a very big head. I know, Gab. Anyway, his hat size is huge.
Getting him on the show anytime soon.
His hat size is huge.
He's a very, very small man, isn't he? He's about
he's a big man. He's a bear of a man. He's a bear of a man. But he has got a huge head. But he has to have a big head because his brain. If that football doesn't even do justice to the size of Gab's brain. Anyway, Gab said, this is brilliant. You must listen to this. He said, the rules really aren't that different elsewhere. There are folks who push the boundaries as far as they can. If they're caught and they can be prosecuted, they are prosecuted. If they can't, it's remarked upon. But either way, we still do business with them. It's not because football is subject to a different set of rules. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's because football is no different in that sense than the rest of society. And at this juncture, I should point out to you listening out there or watching that, of course, Matthew Syed works for Rupert Murdoch. And he also gets paid by BP and Goldman Sachs for speaking engagements. His hypocrisy stinks, I think. Anyway, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Should we give a damn? Should we care? Should we have a moral compass?
Before we do, I'd just like to supplement Gab's point by... Martin Cloak, who's I think he's involved in the Tottenham Supporters Trust, isn't he? But he writes for the New Statesman,
yeah.
And he's a very good writer, actually.
He is.
He kind of elaborated further, and the Syed's biggest crime in the article actually is that he appears to be kind of labouring under the impression that it's the fans that should bear the brunt of the blame for this. And it's the fans that should be responsible, and it's the fans that should try and find some way of solving this, as if there's literally anything that fans could do about it, kind of thing. And it's basically saying that there's nothing about the FA and their fit and proper persons, which actually Abramovich would probably pass, whereas a lot of other owners would not. And it's also, it's just the inherent misunderstanding that you'd expect from like an Oxford educated ping-pong paddling Arsenal fan, basically.
Like, he's an Arsenal fan! He's an Arsenal fan! Well, what a surprise!
Isn't their biggest shareholder...
worse than Abramovich?
Yeah,
but they don't like him, so he doesn't matter.
They don't like him, so it doesn't matter.
For me,
well, what about Kroenke? Not Kroenke, Kroenke?
Stan Kroenke.
Stan Kroenke?
Yeah. I'm sure he's made his...
Jesper Kroenke?
Everything absolutely fine. Like, obviously hasn't swindled anybody out of anything ever.
But I think Gab's point is very salient in
course
that
it is.
respect. You cannot, I mean, it is almost unheard of that if you become an uber successful businessman, you cannot break an omelette, make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. You know, they do bad things because that's how they make their money.
And actually, in terms of the moral compass, I think you need to start from the position that everybody is a hypocrite in some way. There's no point, nobody lives a pure life like not being in any way hypocritical.
Apart from me, obviously.
Well, okay.
But I'm poor, that's why.
No, but you still buy products, for example, that you know there might be something shady.
You know, the
behind,
only
that kind of
person that
thing.
I know who has the purest moral compass in terms of product, money, brand. You know, I'm deadly. I'm not. Yeah, you know, the man behind the T-shirt here. The man behind the T-shirt.
You're quite right.
Chelsea Guevara, also known as he who must not be named.
And he's well and truly one of a kind. In that
He is
respect.
one of a kind. But whatever you say about the guy who is the editor of the CFC UK, he is the most principled person I know, and he won't take the dollar. That's why it's only £1.
So what would he think about Abramovich?
Well, he thinks he's great, as do I. I mean, the fact of the matter is this: is that, you know, I actually was one of the many Chelsea supporters who tweeted Syed, and I was very careful not to be abusive because that would just play into his hands. And I said to him, I said, look, you know, I'll try and put a kind of a non-abusive tweet to you, but frankly, shouldn't you be more concerned with bigger issues in the world like ISIS, what's happening in Chechnya, you name it, whatever. There are bigger issues to be worried about than the fact that Roman Abramovich might have got a bit of dodgy money to buy Chelsea.
This is my issue with the whole article. I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, there's nutters with platforms absolutely everywhere. They can write what they want. I've got no issue with him actually writing it. None at all, even if he's looking for reaction. What really gets me is he writes it and then steadfastly refuses to debate it, self-righteously retweets everyone that either proves his point by being an idiot and abusing him, which is just stupid anyway, or those who agree with him. See, I found one sensible Chelsea fan. Look, let me retweet him. Let's ignore all of the sensible comments.
The banner saying, get rid of Roman.
Do you know what?
That's what gets me, is the fact that he's totally stifling debate on this because he's a self-righteous Burke, basically.
I've got a great quote that sums him up, which you know, basically one of our mates. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do it now, but I do need to discuss the rest of this. But I'm just like, I can't keep this anymore. Gab Marcotti wrote a brilliant riposte to Matthew Syed, which was about 800 words and was full of very long words because Gab's a very bright guy. We have a mate on Twitter, and I won't say who it is. But you know, I won't say who it is. But he wrote this, and so he had 140 characters to eviscerate Matthew Syed, and he did it more effectively in 140 characters than Gab Marcotti, a man who speaks Japanese, did in 800 words. And this is what he said. Matthew Syed, and there's nothing in this, and this is what he said. And there's nothing libelous or slanderous in this at all, which is even better. He's a very clever bloke. Matthew Syed is the worst kind of Burke, a snide, simpering, faux intellectual Burke who actually believes his opinions carry any weight.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Nailed, hook, line and sinker. You know who you are if you listen to the show, but I just loved that. I just thought that was just perfect. But the other thing, I mean, you know, the point I was making a minute ago was, you know, there are far greater injustices in the world than the rise of the oligarchs. But I think just moving it on a minute.
But equally, as a sports journalist's position, it's not his to comment in the same
Oh,
way.
who the hell does he think he is
It's
anyway?
not the same for Martin Tyler to critique Russian
But
history.
here's the thing, you know, Pablo, you
90s,
you alluded to this a minute ago. You know, surely it's up to the authorities to deal with this. And he's suggesting, as you were saying, that he thinks the football supporters we should all go there with anti-Roman banners.
What should we do?
It's up to the authorities, not us.
Yeah. What does he actually want to happen?
Who polices the game? Not the supporters.
Of course they don't.
They're the policed.
We should all be ashamed and all refuse to actually go.
No, but it's not
hang
the
our
Chelsea
heads and
supporters.
stop going to Chelsea
exactly.
because
You've hit the nail on the head, Pablo. You see, you know, Jonathan just said we should all be ashamed. You see, that's what an Arsenal supporter would do. I see Arsenal supporters do shame. You know, they go there every week and they sit there like this, and they don't say anything because it's a library. And occasionally they have a sip of latte, and then they go, "Oh, I can't have latte. It's got too much milk in it, and I'll get fat. I'm so ashamed. I'm ashamed to be an Arsenal supporter. I'm ashamed to be at the Emirates because it costs so much money. I'm ashamed that I spend all of my money on an Arsenal season ticket because it costs £5,000. You know, they do shame.
Boo.
We don't. We don't do shame. Chelsea supporters do not do shame. We have no shame.
I think
I
on
rest
a
my case.
basic level, he's got a lot of interest in him, and he's an Arsenal fan, and he's written an article that has stirred a huge pot up. So
because of how he's
Link bait.
yeah.
Link bait.
He should stick to table tennis, I think.
Yeah, he should stick to ping pong in Bangkok.
My mother played table tennis.
Can I just say something? No one mentions that Abramovich has put over $2 billion in his own.
Wasn't he
Siberia.
literally
Yeah.
the most
Man.
charitable person in the UK last year, or something bizarre like that?
It doesn't sell papers, so why?
No,
why
well, I
bother?
think you've nailed the nail on the head
It's
there,
about
Seb. It's
selling
all
papers.
about selling papers.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, he
It's
clearly...
all about lining Mr. Murdoch's pocket.
Yeah. It's about lining Mr. Murdoch's pocket, but he clearly doesn't understand, what being a football supporter is all about.
No.
I mean, he
Which
clearly
is
doesn't.
just about the only thing he doesn't understand, because he understood the reaction that he was going to get by writing the
Well, he
piece,
doesn't.
so-
Clearly, he doesn't understand what being a football supporter is about, which is why he supports Arsenal,
Quite.
who are about the least football supportery type football supporters in football land. And the other thing I would just say to wrap this up is that, I find it very disingenuous, actually, that somebody who's given that kind of media space, because whether we think he's a Burke or not, and clearly he's a Burke, he still gets that space, and with that space you get power. And what I find really insidious is that he picks on Chelsea. There are plenty of others he could pick on, but he ignores them. And then when we moan about that, he says, "Oh well, you should moan about Roman because I've said that."
There's no point getting annoyed at everybody with a platform who writes something bad about you. As I say, the reason...
Yeah, but I wouldn't have a TV show. If I
No,
did
the reason, as I said, that irks me isn't what he said, or isn't the fact that he's got a platform to say it. It's how he's responded to it and how he's...
Yes.
That's what gets me. And that's
Well, I mean, I
actually
would have happily had him on this show, but I know I didn't even bother asking because I know he wouldn't come on it. But I reckon that with you, me, Pablo, and Jonathan on here, we'd have rinsed him tonight.
Of course we would.
Absolutely rinsed him and his Oxford degree.
He'd be there saying, "No, let's have it straight. Let's have it straight."
But
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
The very
Straight
fact that
side.
it hasn't caught on and none of the other papers have run with it
It's
just
'cause it's
goes to
stupid.
prove that
It's
just
rubbish, mate.
It's something that he's written for.
All
his
right,
own
look, there's another
gain.
thing that I think is rubbish that caught my eye this week. I like this. This could be a new slot. Things that I think are rubbish. I did this last week,
Are
didn't
they
I?
to do with football? Though,
Yeah, they
generally?
are to do with
Oh,
football.
good. I just wondered
Things
that
that
you
I
might
think
have
are rubbish.
A big,
Scotland.
list with a
Scotland. I love Scotland. I'm joking. I love Scotland, and I'm.
You've got a kilt, haven't you?
I've worn a kilt. I burnt it at a
Yeah,
wedding.
yeah.
Not ceremoniously.
No, not deliberately. No.
It wasn't.
Because I really hate
It
kilts.
wasn't. I wasn't like I
I really
whipped it
hate
off.
Scotland, so I got this kilt and I burnt it.
Not subject to contrary to popular opinion. I did not whip this kilt off in the middle of the wedding, bearing my tackle.
Crown jewels.
No, I sat on a candle and the damn thing went up in in smoke.
You
It did.
sat on a candle.
Is that-
I don't think we want to know about that, Chidge.
No, I leant against a wall
Oh,
which
that's
had
better.
candles on.
That's better.
Okay.
Did it
Should we
have to
move-
be surgically removed later?
I didn't even know.
fell on it.
Everybody around me was going, "Can you smell that? Can you smell burning?" And I'm going with a glass of beer and no, I can smell burning. No. And then I looked round and then my whole back of my rear end was going up in flames. There you go.
It was
Shot down in flames.
Or just turned it round the other way. It'd be fine.
I would have been on fire, Jonathan. Okay, I think we should move on. Right, things that I think are rubbish. The FA, and Greg Dyke in particular, I think you are rubbish. Now, Pablo does disagree with what I'm saying here, but I'm going to get my point out first. But basically, they've got this plan
I don't
to...
disagree.
You did outside.
No, I just said I've got some points to make.
All right, okay. Well, look, basically, they've come out with a plan, apparently, that they want to control the way that clubs use their loan players. So, for example, it's basically targeted at the non-EU players and the players that perhaps don't justify having a work permit, even though they have, because the manager shows the commission a video of them looking good and they go okay. But I mean, basically, we have 26 players on loan, some of whom are non-EU, and Greg Dyke thinks by controlling that and lowering that amount, then that we will have a decent England team. I mean, that's the paucity of his argument right there, really. But my point is, I think that that's cynically aimed at Chelsea, who are the one club in the world to have, maybe cynically, I'll admit that, but we have exploited whatever loopholes they are to have a comprehensive loan strategy where we can have a huge amount of young kids on loan, and if they either might make the grade and make the first team like Thibaut Courtois, or they're not good enough like Gokhan Kuta and they're shipped out, or Romelu Lukaku and sold for lots of
All
money.
of which are EU players where it wouldn't make any difference on. But my point
True.
with this is there's kind of an extra issue with this. And my understanding was that firstly with the work permit system, it's only going to be reviewed in a way that kind of is likely to affect lower leagues, in that like they're going to lower the number of teams that kind of, I think it's like the top 80 now, they might make it the top 60, so maybe you might lose out a couple of like players from Congo or something like that, but ultimately it's not going to affect the high-end players who play for the best teams.
Okay.
Secondly, my understanding
It was
is
Ross who was disagreeing on the outside.
Yeah.
He just reminded me.
Secondly, my understanding is that it's only a limit to over 21 players players over the age of 21, which as it is at the minute only really affects Cuevas and De Villa, who are never going to play for us anyway regardless, and probably aren't going to make that much of a profit either. And so I mean I think it's a lot of hot air at the end of the day.
I got
really,
excited about nothing. Not for the first time.
Yeah.
It's my age, Pablo, you know. I have to have hope at this age. But I mean, I tell you what, I think for me it was the fact that it came out, you know, a very similar time to Ron Gawley's statement. I think he had a big interview with the Evening Standard where he proclaimed the virtue of our brilliantly genius loan strategy, which is really our way of getting around financial fair play. And I think we've done that more successfully than any other club in the world. And so therefore I put 2 and 2 together and made 5. And I just saw it as, well, hang on a minute, they tried to nobble us with financial fair play and we got round that very successfully. So now they're going to think of something else to try and nobble us with.
I mean, the headlines
this has all arisen since there have been a few articles, and was it in The Guardian, about how many players we've got on loan.
Well, Alison Rudd wrote a pretty scathing article about it the other day.
I mean,
mind you, fair play to her, got her on Sunday Supplement as the token woman.
I don't know that it actually really necessarily affects the loan system.
I'm not being sexist, by the way. I know you think I was being sexist with my social whatever it was joke, but I think that it's appalling that Sunday Supplement occasionally have a woman on. You know, they're sexist. I'm not.
You're not being sexist. You're just observing.
I'm pointing it out. It's called satire, John.
Blame Neil.
I agree.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted
the whole
your very
thing
eloquent
is
point.
testament to our ability to get hold of all these players who do increase in value, because they're all very good and they can't fit into the team. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable way of making money.
They won't all increase in value, though. That's, I mean,
The vast majority.
No, I know, but I mean, for example, the players that it would actually affect, like Ulysses De Villa is the only one at the minute.
Ulysses. You've got to have a player called Ulysses.
We paid $5 million for him. He's not going to come anywhere close to any of that.
We paid $5 million. Really?
Yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, you know, like Jonathan said, I mean, you know, I was very I mean, I think particularly people like you and me, a bit older, we have great stall by seeing particularly English kids come through the youth ranks and make it to the first team. And I was a bit naught by this whole loan thing and thought, you know, I don't like the look of this. And then I read Jake Cohen's fantastic piece of work in, you know, Plains of Almira's season preview, which is the best analysis.
Terrific article.
And suddenly clicked, dawned on me, right, this is why they're doing it. Yeah. Whoa, that's clever. Now I actually think it's brilliant.
In terms of bringing through English players or whatever, I mean, like, obviously we all know that this is the main part of hot air, is, it will improve England. We all know it won't, ever. But United, who are famed for their youth academy, have brought through their best young defender this season, and he started every single game. And he is terrible. He is so far off the standard that it's untrue.
Or Blackman.
Yeah.
And then he gets sent off.
And
interesting stuff. I mean, I'm going to leave this with a final point, which I think, if you know, as you say, the intention is to bring through more English players and hopefully they'll play for England. And I think if you want to do that, actually, you should probably introduce quotas like they used to, of a certain number of English qualified players playing in each Premier League side, and have the field open for Champions League. But
each team will get much worse.
That debate, my friends, is for another day, because we've run out of time for this part. But we will be back in a second. We've long waited for the fannies. I know they're normally earlier in the show, but this time it's part 5, and they are coming up a combined fannies in a couple of minutes.